Hello and welcome to My Nat Childminder, a podcast meant for Welsh childminders. I'm your host and colleague Charlotte, and today we're going to be talking all about the early years foundation stage nutrition guidance that is coming into effect alongside the changes in the EYFS in September 2025. So grab a cuppa and let's get ready to chat to our first ever special guest. And I'm going to tell you all about her before we get stuck into chatting to her. We're going to talk all about nutrition, why it's important. We're going to talk about fussy eaters and how, ideas on how to handle that. We're going to talk about how to menu plan and basically just make this guidance feel non-intimidating and something that you can achieve. It doesn't have to be super fancy class A meals from a fine dining restaurant. So our special guest that I've mentioned is Dalia Weinreb. She's a registered dietitian based in Cambridge with almost 20 years of clinical experience in both public and private settings. She combines evidence-based whole food, mind-body nutrition with an empathetic approach rooted in her own teenage health challenges to deliver individualised, holistic care that nourishes both body and mind. Dalia believes in empowering her clients of all ages through a non-judgmental, person-centered approach that respects each individual's lifestyle, values, and goals, helping them cultivate intuitive eating, confidence around food, and sustainable, solid health improvements. Her mission is to guide clients towards long-term well-being, not quick fixes, and offers an array of services beyond one-to-one nutrition consultations. And I hope that you feel she is more than qualified to speak to us and that these are all things that we want for the children in our care. So without further ado, please welcome Dalia onto the podcast. So today we're welcoming Dalia. I've just given you a fantastic bio of Dalia's work. So welcome in, Dalia. And thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
So we're going to be concentrating on the new nutrition guidance that's coming into early years, and it will be affecting childminders. And we kind of previously discussed a little bit about how you feel that childminders are a bit different to other settings in the food that they provide. Is there anything that you can kind of chat to the listeners about with that?
Yeah, when I was thinking about um, this podcast and our conversation, I was thinking about what a unique place childminders offer for children. And I myself used, as you know, childminder for my little ones. Not my first, because I didn't know about childminders. And then I was so impressed with my second about the difference between a childminder's care and a nursery setting for, from 6 months onwards. That I actively chose childminding. And so I didn't before that much think about how different it is from a nutrition perspective, actually. And it's so much more of a home-like approach, and therefore the challenges that childminders face are more similar clinically, I would say, to what parents face and consult me about versus larger settings like schools or nurseries. And like you just said to me as well before we were recording, childminders also don't split up the rooms in terms of age groups as well. So they really have to do that multitasking that parents have to do. So it's a parental role despite not being a parent, and that's what makes it so interesting.
Yes, I completely agree. I feel that it's we have a far bigger responsibility if we provide the food.
Yes.
Because lots of childminders don't provide the food. And I think there are some childminders currently with the new guidance that are quite scared and are maybe thinking about turning to pack lunches, which is why I really was keen to have this episode to make it less scary, because I think it's really achievable. And hopefully with your guidance, everyone will also agree that it's achievable and important.
Do,
So I
do you know what
guess,
they're scared?
sorry.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. I was so curious about what might they be scared of with the new guidance.
I think people are worried that they can't meet their expectations, or when you look at the examples in the guidance, they're quite full on meals. There's kind of like fish curry or jerk chicken and full big risotto meals. And I think for a lot of childminders, that's quite unattainable at lunchtime. Um, so I think a lot of people are nervous that they're not going to meet these new expectations when really I think a lot of people are already meeting them and it's just some tweaks. So I'm hoping that your guidance was going to settle people's nerves around that. My first kind of question, I suppose, is why you think nutrition is important for young children. Why do we have to think about nutrition so highly?
Oh. How
Big
long do you have?
question.
Nutrition is such a deep and broad concept and subject. And it's so much more than just what you eat. It's how you eat, who you eat with, and the messages that come, unspoken messages often around food, as well as the spoken messages. Obviously, what we eat is the building blocks of our body and has a huge impact on our overall health, particularly in those developmental years where children are growing so rapidly. We know that the quality of what we put in impacts their ability to grow well and have strong immunity and development, mentally and physically. So you've got the basic biological building blocks that are there and the boxes that we need to tick in terms of macronutrients. So those are your carbohydrates, your proteins, your fats, your fiber, vitamins and minerals. And then we're not even getting into phytonutrients and other things there that all come, if you're doing those other groups well, they'll just come by the by. But then we've got, attitude to eating and food, um, where a child spends their first few years will really determine how they feel about food and their own body. We'll talk probably later about, not force feeding children, for example. I mean, I'm very privileged to hear people's food stories in my clinic, and I'll have people in their 80s who say to me, "No, I can't touch spinach. I was force fed that when I was 3." One of their earliest memories is being force fed something, and it's always such a profound thing for me to hear because I'm like, my God, the food memories we carry really stay with us, almost more strongly than other memories sometimes because it's so sensory and it's such a violation of the body, when that's done to anyone of any age. And so we receive a lot of our messages about our own safety and security around food, with how food is approached with us at a young age. Satiety and appetite cues and how those are respected and generated in that individual. If you're forced or strongly encouraged to go beyond your own satiety, that might teach you later on to override that signal, and then that puts you at increased risk of overweight and associated conditions. Equally, not listening to your appetite, learning to sit with hunger, also not a good thing. And so that's just a few examples of why nutrition is so important because it really is part of how the individual develops. And we interact with food multiple times per day. You've got meals and snacks, particularly when you're little. You don't just have 3 meals a day, you have snacks too. And so there are many, many kind of interfaces there for where we can do a great job or where we can do a less than great job. It's also a zone of imperfection. It's really important I say that out loud to anyone that's taking care of children that nobody does a perfect job with nutrition. It's impossible. Even dietitians don't. And so the pressure we put on ourselves, we should always endeavor to do our best, but we will always be thrown a situation where we have to make a good enough decision versus an excellent, perfect, well-rounded decision. So any kind of intimidation around new guidelines should be a curiosity about where could I do a little bit better in my practice as a childminder, versus, oh, I'm failing at everything. I can't do this.
Good. So it sounds like we've got a really big chat ahead of us, and
Yes.
I hope everyone at home has got their cuppa ready to help through. So I guess the first thing we should talk about is the guidance itself, and
Yeah.
I hope that you managed to have a bit of time to look at
Had a quick read, but you might
yes,
need
a quick
to pull
skim.
me up on certain things.
Um, I think for me, I think it's a good thing because it's been a long time coming that earlier settings have not really had any instruction on nutrition at all. We're kind of just off you go. And I think in many settings, especially group settings and schools, you have chefs or you have the meals brought in to the setting. Um, and if you provide food as a childminder, it's you doing it. You're not really getting a company that brings the ready meals in for you. Um, so I think it's a good thing going forward that we've got the guidance. I personally don't necessarily agree with absolutely everything, but again, I'm not a dietitian or and we're all allowed to have different
Absolutely.
opinions over things. And I must just stress to everyone that Dahlia and I are not saying the exact way to do this guidance, that you have to follow it to what you believe, but we're going to kind of talk through our understanding of it, and hopefully that will help. So it talks a little bit, the guidance, about the difference between um, kind of breastfeeding and weaning stages, and then it separates into a 1 to 5 year old
Mhm.
zone. And I feel that many of us are going to be handling children of all these stages, because we can take children from 3 months old. So we might be having children who are exclusively breastfed or kind of breast milk with bottles right the way through to the 5 year olds going into school. So I think mostly I want to concentrate on the 1 to 5 year olds, because I think that a lot of the 1 to 5 year old stuff can just be adapted for the
Yes.
the weaning stage, if I'm
Yeah.
correct in that. But
Yes,
do pull
absolutely.
me up if I'm wrong. Um, but things we need to think about. Is there anything particular with weaning that we need to think about that might be
I
different
think
to older
it's just
children?
no. I mean, obviously, salt and things like that. Some people really don't like young children having any salt, but it would depend. Again, you would be going with the parents' wish there as well. There's so much difference in how people wean these days. With the baby-led weaning versus the purees. I would imagine that you're very much parent-led at that stage of childminding, and um, we can discuss meal ideas later for the 1 to 5s, but what I would advise all childminders to do is really, if the parent is asking for purees or just lumpy foods at that stage or baby-led weaning, you would be giving that small child a version of what the 1 to 5s were having. That would allow them then to progress through that childminder's care, then getting the whole pieces and so on, and they'd recognize the foods from seeing their peers have it. It's other than that, I mean, I'm very much a supporter of introducing normalized food as early as possible in terms of choices and diversity, because that stops it being kind of special baby food and helps their transition and the socialized eating aspect, which is so precious in terms of development around eating and trying new things and making it fun versus, being stared at by a mother or childminder, like, now this is yours, you've got to eat this. That pressure, even as a tiny human, it causes a pushback.
So to reduce the pressure with weaning, is it advisable to let them play with the food while
Yeah,
they're
I think,
eating?
making a mess, playing texture sensitivity. So if they want to smear it on their face or put a bit in their mouth and some on their nose, doesn't matter. I'm a big fan of those bibs that have sleeves and just everything so that the baby feels free. Something again that really affects people's relationship with food as they grow up. If they had a parent who was crazy about mess, or it would make that child tense at every mealtime if they dropped a crumb, or I've had so many patients whose relationship with food was deeply affected by that, and it started probably before their memory began. Of having a parent be very tense. There's someone who was married into my family and is now divorced out of my family, who she also couldn't cope with feeding her baby because she couldn't cope with the mess. And the mess is normal. That's why I used to try and say to her very gently, this mess is normal. She's a healthy baby. She can't eat neatly. She's a baby. But that's something that, if that baby's allowed to have fun with the food and has an environment where the mess is easy to clear up as well and doesn't have the adult kind of tutting or whatever. And if they're sat around a table in their high chair, with the other children. And I mean, that's just such a, even just thinking about that sounds fun, right? It's just a happy eating time.
Yes, I agree. I think it's hard though sometimes when there
Of
is a
course.
baby splattering everything
Of
and you've
course.
also got other children. And yeah, I think the biggest thing with that is what you were saying, that you make sure the area
Yes.
is going to be as calm for you as possible, because if you've got your precious carpet like a meter away, you don't that's not where you choose to feed
No,
the
you
baby.
choose as you choose, and it's okay to have boundaries as well. As in, like if the baby starts to throw food, you'd say no, please don't throw. That's different to saying, oh, you always make such a mess when you eat. You're such a messy eater. Things like that. That's like personalized. But no, no, we don't throw food because you're not going to let the older children throw food. So it's that consistent line of what's, they can't help being messy. They're tiny. They don't have that motor control yet. But it's making that difference. And then you as the adult, like I always say to parents that I work with, that, don't try and work at the same time as taking care of a 2-year-old because you're just going to get frustrated with a 2-year-old. You choose your work time. So as anyone taking care of children, feed them in a place where it's really easy to clear up the natural, normal mess. But no child should be throwing food. It's not funny and it's not, that's not a behavior we're going to allow to continue anyway. So stop it.
Yes. I agree. M- Going back to the guidance a little bit. So you were talking about working with parents with the textures, and I think that was really important to note because that is something that's coming into the statutory early years foundation stage. In the welfare requirements, there's a part about choking, and it's it's going to be compulsory to have those conversations with parents to to know what stage the child is at, and not just
Good.
assume because of their age that they'll be at that stage. So that's a really important thing to note, and I'm glad that you
Massively
mentioned that, and
so.
it's in line with what we're being told to do. So
That's good.
it concurs.
I didn't know that.
So I guess people are able to read through this guidance themselves and
Mhm.
come to their own conclusions over it.
Mhm.
I just wanted to really highlight that even though the guidance says to avoid things, it doesn't mean that we should tell children that those things are bad, because I think, and I think it's very tempting to do that because they might see, the children that go to the shops with us and they're going to see the packets and things, and then we're going to say, oh, in our heads we're going, well, we can't give them because the guidance says we have to avoid them, and then the temptation then is to explain to the child that, oh, you can't have that because that's bad for you. Um, and I think just regular small interactions like that can kind of snowball into something. Um, so that's kind of what I wanted to highlight there. Um, so I guess moving on a bit, and I did say that the example menus are very interesting, and they're definitely built for group settings with things like um, kind of vegetable biryani and fish and pea risotto and things like this for lunch for childminders is some people do provide it, but I think generally it's going to be quite unachievable. And I think this is maybe where people are worrying because they feel like they're not going to be able to provide enough. So do you have any kind of tips on how we can meet this guidance, but with a focus on we're at home in our kitchen, usually on
Yeah,
our own. Sometimes you have an assistant, and I don't know how other people work, but I definitely do the cooking the night before or the night before because you can have 3 days kind of cooked food. And they generally eat it cold in my setting because I'm on my own and I don't have time to stand around cooking the food at the time. So is there ways that you can suggest on how we can plan menus to fit this guidance in a
definitely.
more realistic way?
Yes. So my first piece of advice would be know yourself first. Are you a person, you're a childminder? Do you like cooking? Are you a cook? Are you an adventurous cook? Do you enjoy it? Do you have the right fridge size? Know yourself. If you are someone who loves cooking, I have patients who find cooking the most relaxing thing ever. They get back from busy jobs. A lot of lawyers like cooking, which is really interesting. Um, they would be the perfect person to do the fish curry or the lovely risotto. And there's a million recipes out there. There's beautiful children's cookbooks out there. Like, use them. That's great. Congratulations. If you're a person that doesn't much like cooking, then you're going to be looking at more. Yeah, me too, actually. I used to like cooking, and then I had 3 children. 2 out of 3 were very, very fussy. And now no, sorry, children, if you ever hear this, I do love you. But it's not, it's made cooking very boring and dull for me because they won't have things mixed together. And So in that situation, you want to think about separates, simple, easy to put together things that, and cold is absolutely fine. So you'd want to then go through the four main things that you need to have on the plate. So you've got your starches, your carbohydrates, you've got your proteins, right? And you want dairy and fruits and vegetables. And so you think about, how can you put that together? Chat GPT is a real help for suggestions. You plug into Chat GPT, I need this, and it can often pump it out for you. And then you obviously have to double check it and make sure it meets your guidelines. But I would strongly encourage a cycle menu. I think that it's annoying to sit down and do, but once you've done it, then the peace that brings that you know what's happening. And often building up a 3 week cycle menu over time is really helpful because then you have this 3 weeks that you just cycle through. And then you get to know which are the children's favorites, and then you can put those in a little bit more often. That's a really good place to build from. But, knowing yourself is really important, how you are around food. A child was never harmed by growing up with simple put together meals versus complicated meals, if that's pleasurable for the childminder to do. Like all parents are different, childminders can be different. Neither one is better than the other. What's the worst thing is a childminder or a parent who's extremely stressed out and moody because they feel like they've had to do something that has then ruined their fun in taking care of the children. So the pressure should be off. Be yourself around the guidelines.
So, in terms of how we can plan a menu,
Yeah.
what are the kind of key things we should think about? The guidance suggests kind of seasonal menus,
Yep.
and it also suggests that if you do have a weekly menu, that and for me it'll be, I think for some childminders it'll be different, but you should consider if you have a weekly menu that you don't put the same meals on each day, because if you only have certain children in
Yeah,
certain
and they'll miss.
days, then they'll miss out. But I have the same children for all
Yeah,
4 days that I'm open, so I provide a kind of a flat menu that
yeah,
changes once a term.
yeah.
Um, so I think it really depends on who you have and when. But is there anything you would suggest that in your kind of, if we go with a weekly menu
Yeah.
plan, what you should think about?
So I think, are you thinking in terms of cooking kind of actual dishes or in terms like a simple put together kind of plate for the less cook lovers?
Um, I think just even more broadly, maybe that just things we should consider in the menu. Like you're saying, we don't have to have cooked meals. For
Yep,
childminders that provide, some people provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner,
yep.
and the snacks. Do you need to have a cooked meal if you provide the whole day's worth of food?
I think
Um,
it's beneficial if you can, just because it's different texture. It's a different introduction of, having the different food groups in there. Um, I like to think about kind of the food groups and then the types of foods within those food groups, imagining as if you had like a card with a name on each one. So we go through starches, you've got pasta, you've got rice, you've got potatoes, you've got bread, you've got crackers, so on, proteins, fish, chicken, meat, tofu, beans, lentils. And then vegetables, different ones. And the fun thing about seasonality is that you can ask the children, okay, this is in season this month. Which fruit would you like to try this month? And then you can build in spontaneity and let them use their choice within boundaries there, which is a lovely thing, a lovely way to use nutrition. And then I would say, okay, I want a dish that is pasta and chicken. And then you have the vegetables that, common vegetables that you might use, a few cooked, a few raw, depending on whether you're doing a dish. Once you've got those components, you can then either plug those components into something like ChatGPT and say, please, can I have a recipe for children that takes 10 minutes to prepare or however much time you want to give to it. And it can pump out 5 different recipes or 10 different recipes, and you can choose for your setting. Equally, you can go through children's cookbooks and look at the diversity there. Diversity would be the key word. It'd be good to introduce children to a few different types of starches, a few different kinds of proteins, and a few different kinds of vegetables, cooked and raw. A few different types of dairy. So you've got cheese, you've got, Greek yogurt, you've got milk, things like that, so that they can develop the diversity within the diet, as well as, learning about the different textures. and the difference between cooked and raw. If you don't feel that cooking is part of your skill set or something that you want to do or can do, a child will not be damaged by having, two main meals a day. This is aside from breakfast, two main meals a day where it's put together in a cold way. And it's the parent's decision at the end of the day as well, whether they want to send a child to that kind of setting. If they have a real principled stance about a cooked meal in the evening, for example, that's their right, but you're not the suitable childminder for them.
Being able to enjoy food is
Oh,
such a privilege, and is
it is.
I've definitely worked with children who don't enjoy food and worked very hard on helping them with that, and and the difference in their mood and their social skills and things, because it is such a social element being able to eat with your friends.
It's
Um,
massive.
so going on to that a bit with the kind of picky eaters, the fussy eaters, is there better terminology we could be using for this?
I don't
Or
know. I
is
mean,
this
maybe
no?
sensory
Okay.
sensitive or, but I tend to use that kind of terminology. And often, if I have a parent wanting to consult with me about their fussy child, I do ask that at least the first consultation, that child is not present. So the parent can openly rant about how difficult it is to feed a child that is picky or fussy. Like I said, I own to myself. It is exhausting and drudgerous. And so I don't have better terminology. There might be better terminology out there, but I might not be aware of it. I certainly still call it that in my clinic. And children own it themselves. I mean, once they're able to be verbal and they kind of say, yeah, I'm really fussy, or I don't like many things, or I hate trying things, they'll say it themselves. And we try to make it a fun process to kind of get that a little bit broader.
So is there anything we can be doing with fussy eaters, especially children who refuse to try new foods? And
Yeah.
this usually, for me, I found has been children who start with you a bit older. So if you have a child that's weaning with you, they're more they're more used to trying the things because our expectation generally is, I'll give it a try. But um, there are children who have got into some interesting habits when they're small with their parents, or sometimes in other settings. Um, and then they come to you completely not willing to try, extreme gag reflex. It may be that they're neurodiverse, so autism, or anything that affects kind of sensory sensations in the mouth. Is there anything we can be doing to support children with these issues?
It's very hard. And again, it's important that childminders don't take it personally that they're doing something wrong. If the child refuses in the 3 years they're in their care, for example, has never tried anything despite trying your hardest, some children just won't until they are much, much older. I'd firstly look at it as I am on, as a mother or a childminder or whatever, I am on an 18-year timeline with this. This is not a 6-month timeline. So the patience is key. The consistency is key. Don't give up offering. Don't give up putting something on their plate if they'll have it. Obviously, children that are neurodiverse, depending on where they sit on that spectrum, might really not allow something to be on the plate. The parents will guide on that. But in general, consistently offering things. So you want to, of course, give them their familiar foods. The best way to introduce a new food is alongside the familiar foods. One of the gifts of the childminding setting is that there's the socialized eating, which just doesn't happen at home unless they have many siblings. But then siblings aren't the same as other social peers. So that is a real strength of the childminding setting, that it's secure like a home. But there's other children there. That's probably one of the greatest force for getting children to try new things is seeing their peers do it. But you'd offer that on a plate with familiar things. Getting children involved in making their own food is really helpful. So if you were to do, let's say, a pasta salad, you'd get them to add their bits or burrito bowls or things like that. That they can pick and choose. And then the consistency of offering it, making it as fun as possible, which it doesn't often feel fun to the adult. It's like, another meal with this fussy child. I love them, but they're really annoying in this aspect. It's okay to be annoyed internally as the adult guiding it. It is, and I say this to parents all the time, it is drudgerous. Nutrition with a child that isn't open to trying is drudgery. It's really hard. It's grueling. So you want to kind of hold space for your own feelings around it and obviously not take it out on the child. Some children just really are very sensory sensitive and they do gag easily. But you want to be patient. Think about the 18-year timeline. Think about not creating food trauma. So no forcing, but encouraging, getting them involved as much as you can in the food prep. Accidents, you don't want accidents, obviously, or knives or things like that for the wrong age group, but where you can get them involved, get them involved. So one way of getting them involved, for example, is saying these fruits are in season. Which ones shall we try as part of our lunches this week? Giving them a sense of autonomy can be really helpful, particularly for the children that are doing it out of a kind of a deep-rooted stubbornness. If they think that they've chosen that creates more openness. But it isn't easy. And sometimes you can't do it. Sometimes you won't succeed at that age. But you might 10 years later have them come and visit you and my 16-year-old, for example, was a very, very, very fussy child, and he's still fussy, but he did say by the age of 13, Mummy, the way I eat isn't socially acceptable, so I will eat anything I'm given around like a dinner table. And I did have to hold in my giggles when we were at a family meal and he was eating quiche. And there's not a chance on this planet. He said to me afterwards, "Don't get any ideas. You're not giving me any quiche at home." And I was just laughing because he ate big slice of quiche and so many other things that he wouldn't normally touch. He became aware that socially his fussiness was just too much. And now that he's 16, he's starting to cook and he's really open to trying things because he's got less scared about it. And I am happy that I didn't ever traumatize him or force him in any way. I stuck to the vegetables that he would eat or the fruits that he would eat and kept offering to this day. I'm still like, is today the day he's going to eat broccoli in my house? He's still not done it. But you can be a dietitian and have a child like that. I was a fussy child. My ex-husband was a fussy child. And so there is a genetic component as well.
It's definitely a very curious subject as to how much
Yeah.
impact it can have. And
Yes.
but I also feel like a lot of this fussy eating can be tackled with children by just being honest with them.
Yeah.
Um, and that I will quite often, if they have egg, for example, I am not okay with egg in egg form. I can eat egg in cake. I can eat egg
Okay.
as meringue, but I cannot eat egg as boiled, scrambled, anything actual egg.
Yeah.
And but they have boiled egg at the moment on Fridays, and they know that I don't eat it with them. And and I'm quite open with them that, like, I've tried it more than 10 times because I always say
Yeah.
to them that they should try things at least 10 times because their brain,
Yeah.
the first time they try something, goes, oh no, something new, I don't like it. And then it slowly gets used to it. And if after about 10 times you're still not keen on it, then, it's probably your brain saying, we're not keen on this. So
Yeah.
I'm honest with them that, like, I don't like egg like this, but it's really healthy for you, and I really wish that I enjoyed that, um,
Perfect.
and things. So I feel like being honest with them and giving them tools. I had one child that I asked if they would be happy to rub the food on their lips like lipstick, um, and that would be their try for the day, and just being a bit creative with it. And
That's
I know
brilliant.
that one family I look after currently, their child is very distractible at meal times, and they use the technique of asking them how to mix food. So if you put a pea and a carrot in, what does that taste like? And now if you put a pea and a sweet corn in, what does that taste like? Almost like mixing colours,
Lovely.
but with taste. So, and I thought that was a really great one that I hadn't really heard of before.
That's excellent. I
Um,
think that's fantastic. And I think when you're speaking honestly, like I give my children steak. I don't like steak. I don't like any red meat. It's a very similar conversation. And it hasn't affected all three of them. Love it. Um, it's a very lovely space for, well, I don't like this. So I say to them, well, you see, I'm getting my protein from beans tonight because I'm not having steak. There's many ways you can get protein. but it offers an opening for discussion around nutrition, flexibility, and the fact that you don't just drop that food. You make sure that you're thinking about replacing it with another adequate source of that food group. And it lets the children be themselves and know that they're speaking to someone who gets it. If, like you say, they've tried properly and they don't like it, the effort to try is really everything as well. I think that's a really important thing. And I think there are differences between us. And children can tell when we're lying anyway. Honesty is key.
So I want to go back a little bit to this um, things that we should be keeping an eye on. And you said about if they're never trying anything new multiple times. But what are we keeping an eye on, and what do we do about it? Because it's full well great that we can identify something might not be quite going to plan, but what
Yeah.
do we then do? Do we
So,
just go, fine, don't eat anything? What's
well, you would again, constant refusal to eat at all is obviously an alarm bell. A child that's not eating, you need to speak to the GP. Refusal to try anything at all. I mean, you'd obviously speak to the parents first and see, is this like a character trait in general? And then, I mean, I would say, in my experience, if there's a child who's refusing to try things at all, you'll notice other kind of red lines in their behavior. By red lines, I mean the absolute refusal to engage in other ways, because the way we eat often reflects the way we live in many ways, or how we behave about around anything. Young children you will be observing them going to many new situations and things because that's the age they're at, right? And so how do they interact with other things? And if you see limitations there, again, you'd speak to the parents and eventually get them to speak to the GP because it's like a developmental issue at the end of the day. If they're not, branching out, if they're not developing. You might want to, again, first obviously speak to the parents and then get in more help. If there's immense stress in the eating environment, if you're noticing that eating makes them stressed, they get very anxious, which might, in a small child, is like, my tummy hurts. They often say that, my tummy hurts. Or you notice their behavior change. One of the gifts, again, of being a childminder is you get to know that child really, really well. I always say that my childminder is mummy number two. She knows my children almost as well as I do. And her input is always really important to me because she gets to see a different version of them. And then to bring those two together is like a whole child perspective. Um, any signs of allergies or intolerances, of course. If you notice when they're eating a certain thing and then their nappy is really messy afterwards, any excessive wind or reflux or poo issues, you'd again look out for that. And then again, GP is usually the first line to go to because they can then refer to different kinds of therapies or assessments. But that's again the valuable place that the childminder occupies, that you get to see this handful of children really closely. So that's what I think childminding offers way higher than nursery schools, and it's just a wonderful thing, that kind of setting.
and have you got any tips on what to do if you think it's a parental kind of a parenting issue because they're passing on their own adversity, or if they're I had one family once where they were making a self-fulfilling prophecy happen where the child wasn't eating, they were very fussy, but then they were so worried they weren't getting anything that they would just, and I think it turned into like 2 pints of milk a day, like full fat milk, to like compensate. So then I had to be quite stern with them and say,
Good.
I want you to stop the milk
Yes,
completely, and I will do the milk here so we can
yes,
monitor, I'll measure it and make sure it's fine. And surprise, they began eating after about a day because they were hungry. Um,
yes. Let them get hungry.
so it's kind of how do you navigate when
Uh,
you kind of you can see it's maybe a parent issue rather than a child, but it is impacting them in the setting.
I think the overarching theme of our whole discussion today is adults know yourselves. And, it would absolutely depend on the parent that you're dealing with. I always say to the schools, etc., with my children, I do not have my child is perfect syndrome, which is what I call, you can approach me. You can say difficult things about my children. I want to hear them. If you're dealing with parents that are, have open characters and they're receptive to listening, I think it's wonderful to share with them, listen, I'm seeing this pattern in my experience. This is what might be helpful. For example, please stop the milk. They're not getting hungry enough. Milk is a whole food. It's going to fill them. Um, Wonderful. They're receptive. You're working together, which is what you're trying to do. You're trying to raise this child together. I know there are parents out there that are not receptive at any age, and you're in a difficult place then, a really difficult place. People can get very, very funny about food and nutrition. Us dietitians know it very well, very defensive, very protective, very sensitive to what they think is criticism, when actually it's like a curious question to try and understand. I mean, in clinic, those kind of patients don't go far. I have to discharge them because I can't help them if they're not willing to listen to what I have to say as a professional. As a childminder, I don't know what you would do. I don't know what the guidance is in terms of parents that don't cooperate, because it would depend how it's affecting your setting, right?
Yeah.
And the
I
other
mean, we are
children.
within rights to cancel contracts and things if we feel, but sometimes when it's these kinds of issues is very difficult, because is that the best interest of the child to cancel the contract when you're seeing these things and you might be the only person who is supporting
So
them?
hard.
It's
I
really
don't
hard.
envy you. If that situation, I don't envy. That is a really, really hard, because like I said earlier in the conversation, you offer that child an opportunity. Like when my children would be like, school dinners is horrible. I'm like, well, have you thought about the children that don't get a meal at home? That's their only meal of the day. You're privileged that you can complain about it because I give you lovely food at
Mm,
home. So it's the same thing when that tiny little child, you are their space where they have better care in many ways. I don't envy you in that situation. I don't have advice on that situation because I don't know. But I validate that it must be bloody hard, really.
Well, I hope you agree that Dalia made all of that feel really comfy. It made nutrition feel fun and interesting, and it certainly helped me to reflect on my own relationship to food and how I can kind of accept that, but also not pass it on to children in my care. And I think she gave us some really good points about kind of how to structure a menu using almost those puzzle pieces, or those little, like, I imagine it as strips of paper in my mind where I pull them across to make new meals and menus. And I also like that she can say that she is an expert in this area, but also struggled with her own children with around fussy eating, and that actually we get to see the result of that and the techniques that she's used with her knowledge, and how actually her child with fussy eating came through the other side. So I really enjoyed my chat with Dalia, and I hope you did too. I hope that you managed to enjoy and think about food in a new way. And I also hope that you now feel more capable of delivering the nutrition guidance and don't feel intimidated that it has to be a 3-course meal served on a gold platter, that it can be, here's the basic things that we need to survive nutritionally, and here's some things we can enjoy, and that you can improve as time goes on. You don't have to be perfect straight away. And I think that Dalia reflected that really well. So a big thank you to Dalia for her time and for being our first ever guest. And I hope that you go forward with this guidance with a bit more optimism and a feeling that you can do it, and knowing that what you're doing is important, and yes, that you can do it. So join us again next time on Mind That Childminder, and take care and eat well and eat happy. See you again soon. Mind That Childminder. Find us on Facebook, X, and Instagram for more about upcoming episodes. All topics discussed are intended for entertainment and educational purposes. This podcast is not intended to give any legal advice and is purely an opinion and supportive piece.